Thank you so much, Calvin, and thank you, Erica, for that explanation. I think it was very important for us, to just, um, yeah, understand exactly what we're doing here today, and also understand like the broader spectrum of what gendered peace really means and what peace actually means on a broad scale. And I'm very excited to welcome our panel. And I just wanted to go through some of the objectives of, this conversation. We want to educate, symposium attendees on the 8 pillars of positive peace, which Erica has done for us to raise awareness about gender-related inequalities in maintaining and promoting peace in and between nations, and to connect like-minded attendees with women community leaders and women-led organizations affecting change on the ground in Africa. So our first panel is going to be with Chinga, just Elizabeth Patterson and Chinga Govhati, and we're going to be talking about acceptance of the rights of others and good relationships with neighbors. Chinga is a child rights professional, a consultant and legal expert who's passionate about child rights and justice for children. She holds qualifications in law, education, and project management. She has 15 years experience in child protection and working on children's rights and violence against children in various capacities as a magistrate, children's desk officer, lead child development planner, programs officer, programs coordinator, and public prosecutor. So she's got a lot going for her. And then our next panelist is Elizabeth Patterson. For some reason, I can't see Elizabeth's profile actually. Actually, I see. Oh no, I don't see it.
Okay. All right. So should I introduce myself now?
I'm so sorry about that. I just can't seem to find it.
No problem.
Yeah.
Should I introduce myself now?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'm Elizabeth Patterson. I'm calling in from Ghana. I'm the founder of the Girls Education Initiative of Ghana, or GEIGR. Our mission is to provide academic and financial support for girls and applicants with special needs or disabilities. I have a background in public policy. I have a major in political science and business management, and I've been doing this work for nearly 10 years. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, and I just found it after the fact, but you know what? Everything is okay. Let's get into the questions here. Since we already have Elizabeth on, do you mind just telling us more about your work in the gender equality space?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
In the umbrella of education, I would like to say I'm an educator. A former teacher, and then transitioned into policy work, and then founded my organization, the Girls Education Initiative of Ghana. Or GEIG, because that's a mouthful. GEIG has been for nearly 10 years working on behalf of girls here in Ghana, specifically in the Greater Accra and the Ashanti regions, from very low income, underprivileged families, more often than not, single parent household, mainly led by females. And we also advocate for inclusion of people with disabilities to get access to education and education reform here in Ghana and in the US.
Thank you so much. And Chinga, could you also just get in and just tell us more, about your work within the gender equality space?
Thank you. Hi, how are you, everyone? Thank you to the first speakers, Anuziwa and Elizabeth, talking about gender peace and also the pillars of positive peace. My work is around children, mostly children going through the justice system. My experience is with those children, I would just say maybe broadly gender-based violence. And that's what I'm going to be talking about, but focusing more in particular on education. And I've had so many interactions with the law at grassroots level, looking at the community structures, looking at how families work together to respond and prevent gender-based violence. I've done also a bit of research around the issues around ending child marriage. I have helped with the simplification and translation of the SADC model law on ending child marriage for 3 communities in Zambia, in Malawi, and in Zimbabwe. I'm also a member of an entity that we recently put together with other like-minded practitioners, which is called the Pan-African Alliance on Ending Child Marriage. So I'm very much looking forward to this symposium.
Am I the only one who's lost Chinga?
Yeah, she froze.
Okay. Okay, I think maybe it's just a network issue. We can continue. She can continue once she gets back in, but we can just keep the conversation going. You know, when Anuzia was speaking, she was talking about how the issue of gendered peace really is something that affects all of us. The issue of peace affects all of us because we get to share this world, right? And I think, you know, when we talk about gendered peace, sometimes we see it as a binary issue to say man and woman, you know. But, you know, I think we need to go beyond that, beyond the spectrum of male, female, him, her, or whatever, because we're increasing learning more and more about, you know, the diversity that exists around us. So how do we also additionally promote, you know, gendered peace within our communities for people who are different from us, from people who fall outside these binaries that we've grown up around, you know, that we've understood to be the norm. And this brings us to the next question, you know, and I think it's an important question because now we get to really contextualize what we're saying, because, you know, Erica was talking about, you know, it might sound as if it's more conceptual, but this conversation is really just supposed to make us really see practically, like operationalize these ideals. How do we actually exist in this world, and what steps do we take, and what steps are being taken? It's not only about, you know, building future communities, it's also about acknowledging some of the work that is already being done, you know, to promote peace within our communities. So my first question will definitely go back, we'll go back to Elizabeth, and it's, why do you feel that accepting others' rights and good relations with neighbors is important to gender equality? Why do you think it's important to accept others and to have good relations with your neighbors? Why do you think that that's an important aspect of gender equality?
Oh, sorry, your video paused for a second, so I did not catch the question. If you could repeat it.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear me now? Okay,
Yes.
The next question is, why do you feel that accepting the rights of others and having good relations with your neighbors is important to gender equality? Just accepting the rights of others and also just having good rapport, good relations with others. Why do you think that's an important aspect of gender equality? Okay, I thought it was my network. If anyone can confirm that they can also hear me, that would be great.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Yes,
I think
Daisy,
Henry
we can hear
dropped
you.
off.
All right. So I guess we can go to Chinga. Chinga, are you there? Chinga, are you there? I think Elizabeth is back.
Yeah, Danai, I'm
But-
back. I had a power outage, but I'm hotspotting from my phone. Sorry.
Okay, so did you get the question?
If you could repeat it again.
No problem. Okay, so the question is, why do you feel that accepting the rights of others and having good relations with neighbors is important to gender equality? Why do you think those are important aspects to gender equality?
Okay, so when we're young, right, or when we have children, we teach them to treat each and every person the best way or the fairest way possible. So there should be no reason why I should be treating someone who's an other like differently from me. So I think if I treat you and I see the person that you are intrinsically for who you are, then I think all of us can live in a peaceful environment. Accepting the rights of others and their differences, it starts from us. Like we acknowledge that each person is first and foremost a human being, and then they have access to all the rights and abilities and the qualities that we're supposedly born with. And if you see yourself not as better than anybody else, I believe that you will treat your fellow human being more respectfully, and that would engender peace.
Just to continue from what you're saying, within your own community, what do you think, what are some of the difficult relationships that people have to encounter with accepting differences? Like, what
Okay.
are some of these? Yeah.
Okay, so I will share my personal story. I'm a woman first and foremost. However you want to look at it, I'm a woman. I'm an African woman. I'm a Ghanaian American woman. When in certain spaces, I realized and also I'm a woman with a disability or a different need or a special need. In certain spaces, I could confirm that I get treated differently or there's a certain bias towards me because of any of those buckets that I just drew up. So if I'm in Ghana, my disability is just always in my face because it's not the norm for Ghanaians or Africans to see a woman with a disability more or less thriving, right? But when I'm in the US, I almost never have to encounter that. But when I come here, it's always very much prevalent. My limitations are prevalent because there are certain spaces that I don't easily access because they're not accessible to me because of my limitation. Yeah. And
Yeah, I think, no, go on. Sorry. Go on.
no, go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to just add that. So essentially, to actually create more peaceful communities, we need to deal with things like accessibility. Like that's one of the factors that we need to look at. Because if you can't function, if you can't move, if you can't access these spaces, then you are completely shut out, or you're at the mercy of everyone else. Some people don't want you to lift them with their wheelchair. They would rather have a ramp, something as, something that you think is a no-brainer, might not be such a no-brainer in some of these communities, and that actually just hinders your capacity to be. Yeah.
Yeah. So on numerous occasions, I would love to always travel with public transportation, right? But in instances where I'm going on
Have we lost Elizabeth?
It's frozen on my side.
Yeah, I think
No.
we've lost. But do we have
Yeah.
Chinga? Is she able to step in and also just
Yeah, let's try. Amin.
Oh, yes. Oh, okay. Lovely. Um, so Elizabeth was just also talking about, the importance of accepting other people's rights and having
Yes.
good relations with your neighbor.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is an important factor to gender equality. Why do you think it is so important to accept the rights of others and to have good relations with your neighbors?
Thank you, Daisy. Sorry, Elizabeth has covered that in terms of because somebody is human, we are supposed then to acknowledge them as having rights. And for me, when I'm talking of gender, I then think around in terms of what do we have in place in terms of, because it's the law, when we're talking about frameworks, when we're talking about conventions that provide for gender equality. And what comes to my mind is, first of all, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is CEDAW. And for me, CEDAW is key in the sense that Arno Ziva talked about the promotion of participation, the encouragement of peace and equality, and these are things that we cannot separate. And coming back to the work that I do, working with children and the law, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, that also provides for a spectrum of rights. In fact, it provides for what I would call the protective framework around children, looking at the need to survive and develop, the need not to be discriminated against, the need to participate or be heard, and then their best interest. And when we lost Elizabeth just now, she was talking about certain, what we would call certain disabilities, and we have the Convention on the Rights of Persons with disabilities that actually most nations are party to, and also around non-discrimination, around elimination of the worst forms of child labor, that is at international level. At regional level, I think the most talked about is what they call the Maputo Protocol, which is the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and its protocol, which we call the Maputo Protocol when it comes to gender issues. And we have a number of other frameworks like the SADC protocol, and even at national level. For me, we then have the Constitution that's saying we should not discriminate. We should allow others to participate, and generally strategies, policies, and plans that are in place to address issues to do with gender-based violence. So for me, it's the presence of the legal frameworks in place that will say, okay, what do we mean when we talk about gendered aspects or gendered positive aspects to enabling peace for a child, for a girl, for a woman to flourish and be who they are meant to be.
That's very insightful, Chinga. And I'm just reminded of something. When I was in Zimbabwe, I encountered this organization that teaches sexual reproductive health. I think I say this story a lot, actually. They teach sexual reproductive health to families. So they teach parents how to talk about sex with their children.
Yeah.
So they give parents sex education to be able to accommodate their children in the homes, instead of, I mean, culturally, sometimes you just get beaten up and you don't even know what is wrong with your behavior, because maybe that your parent disapproves, but you actually don't understand why they disapprove, things like that. So they kind of teach communication with children. They teach how to handle things, related to sexual reproductive health, and how to talk to children according to, depending on their age group. So as a child's rights, activist and a person who's worked very, very extensively with children, how do you, they say charity begins at home. How do you think like we can foster that kind of openness to accept people who are different from us? Because we know, especially, now we're reading stories about bullying, we're reading stories about all these things. How do we teach children to be more accommodating of each other and to be more accepting of differences, because maybe they come from a different perspective, maybe they speak a different language, maybe the child who's coming to their school is a refugee. So how do we teach children to be more open to differences and to create good relations? Yeah.
For me, I think I would actually encourage a maybe 2 or 3-pronged approach where we are looking, I think you've put it well in a nutshell, that we're looking at encouraging children to have good relations with each other, but also encouraging parents to be not only accepting of their children, but to understand their child, which is the parenting aspect. And then I would then go to the community level where we are talking about having good relations with your neighbors. Is the community aware of the differences that we actually have in our children and what's needed for each child? So for instance, I think you appreciate that a certain type of a child may not be acceptable in a community. And I'm thinking of a child offender. And we have also seen tags or stigma or stereotyping around girls who drop out of school because they've fallen pregnant, who drop out of school because they've been sexually molested and they fall pregnant. And at the end of the day, there's a tag that is placed on them. So we need what I would call a multi-sectoral approach in terms of dealing with these issues, where we have players coming on board, firstly for parents to understand children, firstly for communities, secondly for communities to understand families, and also at national level, do we have safeguards that protect these different types of children with disabilities, children coming from vulnerable communities, and children who are aligned to certain agendas which may not be acceptable at family level and at community level. So for me, I think it's then looking at parenting packages. It's also looking at empowerment and mentoring packages for children, so that they accept each other, so that they look out for each other, and we deal away with things like bullying, things like not accepting other people's rights. I think that way we may be able to make certain inroads in making sure that we deal with issues that derail, for me, development and progress in terms of looking at rights of others.
Oh, thank you so much, Chinga. And I also just like that you mentioned mentorship. It's such an important aspect. And I'm glad to see that Elizabeth is back. I don't know if you remember what you were talking about, but if you would like to just continue continue the conversation that you were having with around the issue of making it. Oh, I think we've lost Elizabeth again. Okay, that's fine. I guess we would have to continue the conversation with you, Chinga.
That's all right.
Okay, no problem.
There's so much to talk about, Daisy.
There's just a whole lot to talk about, So how do you believe that, accepting the rights of others is instrumental in creating and sustaining peace? How do you think that helps? Like, you've talked about all these things, you've talked about the importance of having different actors and actually just having everyone participating. And I keep hearing this from everyone, starting from Anuziva right up to you now, Chinga. You're talking about it's like a communal thing, like we all have a role to play in fostering environments. And why do you think that is important, accepting the rights of others, Why do you think that that is such an important factor for sustaining peace?
Well, it's really important, because imagine a community where everyone not only has rights, but these are rights.
I think we've lost Chinga.
Hi,
Have we?
sorry,
Oh, no
My-
worries.
very inconsistent. But hopefully I'm back now. I don't know what I missed.
We were
I'm
just
sure.
we were just continuing with the first question and just getting into some of the work that Chinga is doing as a child rights activist. But also I'd just go back to you to say, do you still remember what you were talking about, and are you able to continue the conversation from where you left off?
I would try to recollect what I was saying.
Yes, as much as you can.
Basically,
Thank
I was
you.
talking about us coexisting in different in spaces, environments where there are people who are different from us. And
Yeah.
if you look at somebody who is quote unquote disabled as completely not capable, imagine what you will be missing out on, right? And if there's a whole population, if I remember the stats correctly, 1.2 million or billion people in the world, I would say identify as disabled or are disabled, whatever capacity it is. So look at the economic disadvantage it would be to us as a society if we completely marginalize this population of people. And that could create a lot of discord and not leave us in a peaceful environment. And so likewise with women, if we say that women don't belong in certain spaces, women are contributors to our economy, the well-being of our homes, the well-being of our communities. We're the backbone of a lot, right? So if we continue to stigmatize and marginalize women, and especially a woman with a special need or disability, imagine the benefits that we're not gaining.
Absolutely. So, how do you believe that accepting the rights of others, all these different groups, and how do you think this is instrumental in creating sustainable peace?
Okay, I think I came in at some point. If I see you as a whole person with dignity, I would want you to treat me with the same dignity as I treat you, right? And if we do that towards one another, I think we could coexist in a very peaceful environment. I think of the concept of Ubuntu, where we're supposed to all, each one looking out for the other person. And if we are all doing that, I believe that we could really live in a more peaceful world. And like I said earlier, once we see each other for who we are, as, I don't want to bring God into it, but as God, as the way that God created us, and just as human beings at the basic level, we will not see our differences and we'll treat each other better, and we can coexist more peacefully.
Yeah, I agree. And on a policy level, how do you think we can manifest these things and, make them part of our society in the same way we know that they collect litter every Wednesday and paper comes in the morning at 6 a.m. How do you think on a policy level, how do you think this is instrumental in creating sustainable peace, this acceptance on a policy level?
So I recall Ghana's constitution, I was 715, right? And that's supposed to promote inclusion in all spaces, in all of our spaces. And there's even a caveat in here that says that is if a building is more than, I think, 3 floors, we're supposed to have an elevator in there to make sure. 2 floors, if somebody who is physically challenged, you need to have an elevator in there so everybody could access that building. But we know that these policies on paper are beautiful, but in practice, they're not actualized in practice. So I would love to see a little bit more translation of the policies in our everyday lives. And I think Chinga, I came in briefly, she was talking about child marriage. Ghana also had a policy that's talking about reintegrating pregnant moms. The last panel I was on with Ursula Institute was talking about this. Reintegrating pregnant students or teenage mothers back into schools and societies, so they're not so stigmatized, and they could also access the highest level of education that they want to. It goes back to the rhetoric of, are we actually enforcing these policies? Because if I'm a 15-year-old who, for whatever reason, has found herself pregnant and has gone back to school, 9 times out of 10, or I would say 10 times out of 10, I will either not be allowed back into the school environment, or I would have to go to a school where I'm isolated. I have not seen or heard of a school in Ghana where a pregnant girl has been allowed to go to school full term till she's gone to deliver. So if we have those like actual practicality of these policies, I think it would be very good for us. So a more peaceful environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chinga, speaking of practicality, why do you think that accepting the rights of others is instrumental in sustaining peace? Just to continue from where Elizabeth left off.
All right, I thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you. You were talking about it policy level, and I then got reminded that actually the Sustainable Development Goal 16 talks about peace, justice, and strong institutions. And for me, once we have peace and then we have justice and our institutions are strong, then it's easy to achieve gendered peace. And I would, in that vein, I would then say, well, it's clear we just need countries to adopt measures that ensure a lot in terms of making sure that we then have acceptance of rights for others, be this at legislative level, at administrative level, and put in place very strong social and economic measures, and also design programs that aim at eradicating norms that go against the realization of rights and creation of strong institutions, be they family and community level, which we are calling our neighbors. And then we need also to then promote the strengthening of collaborations and coordinated efforts amongst different actors and players to improve on not only enforcement of rights, but also for the provision of what I would term integrated short, mid, and long-term response to issues that go against gendered peace. Before I go, I would then just want to talk briefly, Daisy, about education, which is one other area that I'm passionate about. Recently, I was reading about an article by UNESCO in 2018, which indicated, in fact, it was around Africa grappling with huge disparities in education, in that as a continent, we suffer from what they termed low quality teaching and learning, and inequalities and exclusions at all levels. And when we talk about exclusion, I'm thinking more in terms of where we may have a number of girls and young women, 15 to 24 year groups who are now going on the other side of literacy, or what we would call illiteracy, because they are dropping out for so many reasons, not only to do with pregnancy and abuses of all sorts, but because of economies that are not supportive and policies that are not supportive of completion of primary level education. We then don't talk about secondary level and tertiary level education. And it is because we are not seeing the right to education is key in terms of strengthening our institutions. And when now we talk about the pillars that Erica was talking about, it's not only acceptance of rights, but we want well-functioning systems that are well supported in terms of equitable distribution of resources and investment of high levels of capital, so that at the end of the day, we then have nations that are functional, communities that are functional, and families that are functional, because we have actually gone out of our way to invest in what I would term the future generations, our young generation. The 15 to 24 year age group for me is actually key in terms of not only promoting peace, but ensuring social cohesion as we go on in future.
Yeah, thank you. You really touched on a lot of issues, Chinga, and I just want to pick out one of them. When you're talking about resources, there's this project that is happening in Nigeria that I've been following for a couple of years now. It's called Follow the Money, and it's really just about looking up at where is the money going, where are the state funds going, what the taxes, what are they being used for? Those are some of the important questions that we need to ask, because honestly and truly, resources, like especially financial resources, are such a major factor when we're looking at promoting sustainability of any kind, even promoting peace itself. When there is no resources, then people are left with more limitations. They have limited options and limited choices. And as Erica was saying in the beginning, that it's important to have choices, right? If you say this is a buffet and anybody can eat, but the only option that is available for the vegetarian is tofu, but everybody else can eat 3 types of meats, 9 types of dishes with all these meaty products or whatever, it's really a difficult thing to say the vegan or the vegetarian has a choice. So those are some of the things that we have to really look at. And you also start to see how the issue of peace is so interconnected. All these factors, all the 8 pillars are interconnected somehow. So I'm very glad that Chinga was able to bring that up. And also, it's also getting us into our next question, which I will put to Elizabeth. Do you believe that power imbalances between genders within societies and their leadership breeds distrust? Do you believe that power imbalances between genders within society and their leadership breeds distrust and closed borders between neighboring communities? If so, how?
Okay, so I was just making a few notes on what my response would be. The question in itself automatically says that there's a power imbalance, right? So if there's a power imbalance, it means that there's somebody who will have and somebody who will have not, right? So there's always going to be the haves and the have-nots, because there's a power imbalance, and invariably one group will be discriminated more so than the other because of the presupposition that there's a power imbalance. Somebody has more power than another person. And so I think that we as a society can try to start operating in a space where we share power, that not one person doesn't have power over the other, there's power with, right? And I'm trying to think of a more concrete example, like within education, there's always going to be someone who's teaching. But if we could even, and the idea that there's a teacher or an instructor standing in front of the classroom visually creates this, that person has power over the students. So what I'm getting at is the fact that like if we could even like physically construct or reassemble the way our classrooms are, it will shift the power amongst us. I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense. Like if I enter a classroom where my professor is sitting in a circle and then the rest of us have to sit with him or her, I wouldn't feel like there's a power struggle, like somebody has power over me by the mere virtue of the fact that the teacher is positioned in the front of the classroom. So I don't recall if there was a second component to your question, but I hope I've answered succinctly. But if there was, please remind me.
Yes, you've definitely answered most of the question. But in addition to that, you know, these power imbalances and the distrust with the leadership, how do you think that it also fosters closed borders between neighboring communities? How do you think that that cascades into the relationships that we have? But you know, like the more I think about it, it's such an existential question to talk about borders.
Yeah.
Because we're in this era of decolonization and reconceptualizing this idea of borders. But you know, go ahead.
So I don't want to go there, but it's gonna sound somewhat controversial. Physical border, like because I have one foot in the US and the other one here in Ghana, the only example I could think about right now when I'm thinking about borders being closed off to certain people is the US-Mexico border, right? Like I live in New York when I'm there, and a lot of the workforce is Hispanics is like derogatory. People, Latin Americans, right? The Mexicans who have crossed the border for economic reasons to come into the States to find work and prosperity for them and their families. And when we put up physical structures or physical barriers to alienate a group of people from coming over just because that they want to have prosperity for themselves and their families, I'm sure I don't want to start to think about it, but there is a more effective way to get people who have already crossed over into our country or the United States to legally be there and like cross the border and contribute to the well-being of their families as well as the well-being of the United States. I'm sure that there's a way to work around that, but when we put up these physical barriers or like imaginary barriers between us, it really, really doesn't engender peace amongst us and our borders and humanity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm just thinking about, you know, when I joined the Osawa Institute and I discovered something that was really amazing. That, you know, as an organization, like everyone is feeding in whatever expert picture too, so we can realize the bigger picture. And I really, really appreciate that, because these hierarchies, like, you know, they're replicated everywhere around us, and so they create this dominance, you know. So I'm bigger, I'm better, I'm more knowledgeable, I'm this, and they create so much intolerance, and this intolerance cascades, and it's got this crazy domino effect, and try to put it in there. Ultimately, it's something that, but until then, I think in a small way, if we are to really eradicate these hierarchies within our societies, to say, well, I'm the father, so therefore what I say goes, I'm the teacher, therefore I'm immune to correction. I think if we remove those, as Elizabeth rightfully stated, we're a better placed, to create more sustainability in the future that we actually want. And I think that it's important for people to visualize this, because we have been conditioned to the same things over and over again, to a point where we can't even imagine a better society. So it's up to us, especially if we can visualize these communities that are more inclusive, more accepting, more equal. So for Chinga, I'm bringing to you the very same question to say, what are some actions? No. How do you believe that the power imbalances between genders within society and leadership, how do you think they breed distrust and ultimately also lead to closed borders between neighboring communities?
We actually have a high, I think patriarchy, Daisy, is actually affected so many aspects of our communities, our different communities, especially for Southern Africa, where we see it at social level, at policy level, and even at economic level, resulting in what I would also term as policy, social, and economic barriers or borders. The borders that you're talking about, they don't necessarily need to be physical for us. So, for instance, a child will fail to access her basic rights or will fail to enjoy her basic rights because of certain beliefs at family level and at community level. For instance, that girls will never do better than boys. So at the end of the day, we then have it's a girl who doesn't then proceed with the development in terms of education. And when we are now looking at policy level, we may actually having laws in place that are also a barrier to the enjoyment of certain rights. So for instance, you need recourse in your issues. Where do you go if the law doesn't allow for that, or if we don't have a law in place, or where still we have a law that's not being implemented for certain reasons, maybe beliefs, or because economically there are no resources to make it work. I've seen a lot of national action plans, even at regional level. I've seen a lot of laws at national and regional levels that are not used simply because there are no adequate resources in place to make them work for the end beneficiary. So at the end of the day, we then have these barriers that will result in somebody saying, I may have this right that you talked about, Daisy, that at international, at regional, at national level, I have this legal framework in place that protects me. But how do I access that right when I don't have the resources, or when I don't have support at family level, or when my neighbors are afraid of approaching and confronting my family? At the end of the day, we have laws that are not accessible in that sense. So for me, when we are thinking more in terms of borders, we need to think more in terms of what's obtaining even at environmental level. I'm thinking of the impacts of COVID-19 on a number of children that most could not even access the online. In fact, online learning was not a viable option for most learners in households because it was the cost was either high in terms of data or access to internet compliant gadgets. So at the end of the day, we then say, are these short-term or long-term impacts of what then happens? And we may only begin to see when maybe in the long run that we have failed because we didn't look at issues holistically, and we never projected in terms of what could be the barriers, what could be the emergency response plans in place if this were to happen, for somebody to say at the end of the day, I've enjoyed my rights.
Yeah. Wow. I just want to invite anyone in the audience, if they've got anything to contribute to the conversation right now before we move on to the next question, please just unmute your mic and let us hear what you have to say. Okay. Doesn't look like anyone would like to contribute at this moment, but you can also just add it into the chat box and I will allow you to get a word in after the panelists have spoken. Just to move on to the next question, and I think this is such an important question because as Africans, we constantly hear about this term Ubuntu. We hear about, you know, people who identify as Pan-Africanists talking about the importance of Ubuntu. And even if you don't subscribe to any of the politics, you grow up around this concept of Ubuntu. But like, how do you feel that gender equality has been left behind when we talk about the concept of Ubuntu? I'm going to bring this question to Elizabeth.
Sorry about that.
No
How
problem.
do you think that gender equality has been left behind when you think about Ubuntu? Just to repeat the question.
Yes, yes.
I feel like it goes back to us not seeing all of us as our whole and full beings. When you don't see another person as a complete human being or a complete person with all their dignities and all their rights, Ubuntu cannot work and cannot be practiced in the totality of it. Short and sweet, yeah, that's it. If I see you as a whole equal person, how am I supposed to practice like respect and generosity towards you, which is basically what Ubuntu is. So yeah, without that, Ubuntu does not exist. Thank you.
Yeah. And Chinga, what do you think about this? Why do you think gender equality is lagging when it comes to the concept of Ubuntu?
Ubuntu, for me, we've actually seen, I would like to applaud South Africa in terms of when we're looking at transforming the constitution, what they call constitutional transformation, that Ubuntu is one of those principles and concepts that they've incorporated into their constitutionalization. And you then hear them when they sort of interpret what the Constitution says. This is one of the principles that's talked about, that we are Africans. There's this humanness in us that we can never put aside. And peace is one of those aspects where it's not only peace at national level, but going down to family and communities, and also going up to regional and international level. And that this is what binds us. When we have peace at all levels, then we are able to prosper, and we are also able to enjoy certain rights as human beings. So it's centered on being human, but not only being human, but being human in terms of having empathy for each other. So the term itself, it's I am because of you, and because you are there, I am here. So at the end of the day, I cannot be an island. I cannot operate or exist in a vacuum because there are other people around us. So whenever we talk about Ubuntu, we are thinking about not only the rights of others, but we are also thinking in terms of how do we make them realizable. These are not just rights, that are written on paper. These are not rights that are in a vacuum, but rights that are actually are supposed to be enjoyed by people, and not only people, but we're looking at people in their differential needs aspects. So for somebody who is living with a disability, for somebody who is coming from a vulnerable community, for somebody who has gone through so much in life, this is what we need. So when we take certain aspects from others so that this one can come then to our level, that's Ubuntu. We have done what's right because we are human.
Yeah, absolutely, Chinga. I'm just reminded of one of my favorite quotes from feminist from Zimbabwe. Her name is Bella Matamba-Nadzo, and she talks about African feminism. She talks about being given a sense of citizenship, and she talks about it saying citizenship not in the nationalist sense of coming from a nation state, but citizenship as being very much aware that we're daughters of the soil and the soil belongs to us, and we have particular rights and entitlements, not as an act of benevolence or charity from governments or constitutions, but by a sacred process of belonging. And I think that's an important aspect of Ubuntu, is this sacred place of belonging, simply because, you know, we come from this continent, and, you know, we've got ancestry here, you know, we're descendants of the soil. I think if we are to recognize that, and as Elizabeth said, just to recognize someone as a full human being, we are better off. And back to Elizabeth, I want to speak to you directly. I want to speak directly to your work with GIG. What insights into the attitudes of people have you observed? Well, I mean, what are the insights? No, that's not it. Okay, so what are some of the insights that you have observed from like people's behaviors when it comes to peace or like just relations? What have you observed from the work that you've carried out and the missions that you've done under GIG? What are some of the insights that you can bring to the table today?
Okay. There's always the pushback. Everything is for girls, everything is for women. Why do we need another organization doing women and girls work? So that's the biggest thing that I have experienced doing this work for almost 10 years. There's always that pushback, that why is everything focused on just girls, right? And not more inclusive of men. But that it goes to historically, men have been the ones that are in positions of power. And we all know that there was a point in time where women and girls were not even able to vote in certain countries or access school. And in some parts of Ghana now, the idea that a young girl is supposed to access a certain level of education is like mind-blowing. So it always goes back to that. Why just girls and not also include boys? And then since we also focus on disability advocacy and ensuring that there is access to education for people with special needs or disabilities, there's always a lot of education, or I won't say re-education, but there's always a lot of the need to educate people around why people with special needs or disabilities need to be included in, I won't say certain spaces, but in education itself. I remember a couple of years ago when some of our students got diagnosed with dyslexia, and we went to advocate for them or to have extra testing time or accommodations so they could thrive in the classroom and in the school. One of the things that the head of school said to us was that, oh, she doesn't need anything, she's just stupid, right? So if she's just stupid, so if that blanket statement that she's just stupid, imagine if every other child in Ghana who may or may not have dyslexia had access to having it be diagnosed in the way that our students were diagnosed, and the mindset and the perception is that they're just stupid, they're not trying. imagine that what that would do to the students, number one, their confidence and their ability to even like thrive in school, in the world, in society. It's like, it's dehumanizing them, and that does not bring us a peaceful coexistence with one another, right?
Yeah. Yeah, those are very important insights, especially about why everyday women's rights?
Why just the girls? Why?
Why? You know, what about the boy child? Oh, men get raped too. It's as if when you support something, you're seen as disregarding. When that is not actually the position. And I think that's such a disconnect, because also there are other women who are also subscribing to this. They also don't understand the they want to see, or some parents were, you know, people were parents to boys. They also think, okay, now that I've got a boy, is his chance, are his chances in the world going to be limited simply because they don't have other women to, you know, lean on, whatever. But I think it's just a big misconception that maybe can only be, you know, fixed, or the gap can only be bridged with continuous conversation, and also just the importance of, you know, having girls being included and building these communities together. My next question is going to be to Chinga. In your work in child protection, what are some of these driving forces behind child endangerment? What are these threats to children's existence that you've seen in your work?
I think as I answer that, let me also respond to what Kelvin has said in the chat box. He's asked, as a society, what approach should we need to protect gender rights, and also looking at transforming or changing our beliefs and practices, so that at the end of the day, we are not accused of being those activists that are bringing in foreign components to our culture, to our religion. So when we are looking at this, I think the best way to go about for me is not only to look at the harmful practices that we call out, but also to look at the positive practices that go on. For instance, a child belongs to the whole community. Hence, my neighbor is a key family member when it comes to upbringing my child, that whatever little that we have as a community, as a family, should be shared equitably. Of course, there are issues to do with, Erica told us about one pillar which talks about low levels of corruption that will come on board, where somebody wants to hoard things for themselves at the expense of others. So at the end of the day, when we're talking about child protection and we are saying, what is it that we can do so that a child is not endangered, a child is not put in danger of having their rights trampled upon, is just appealing to that sense where people have to understand that a child is not only a human being, but an adult in transition. They will reach adulthood at some point, and at some point they will be able to make decisions for us when we are no longer able to make those decisions. And we then need to bring up a generation of young people who will also look at our rights and say, no, they need to enjoy their rights, and we should make the playing field even so that everyone enjoys their rights. So it's like investing in them, but also planting a seed whose also harvest we would want to enjoy in later life. So for me, it's not only looking at a child in terms of being a child that needs to have things done for them. When we put on our child protection and child right lenses, we are then seeing a child in a different light altogether. We were saying this child will need more rights. They will need more in terms of investment now because they are young and they need us for them to also enjoy their rights. So it's putting in place measures at policy, at social, at economic level where these rights will be enjoyed later on in life, but it has to start now. We can't wait until they are adults for them to enjoy their right to education, their right to justice, their right to health. It has to start now, and it starts with us, acknowledging them as fellow human beings.
Yeah, I agree. Just to also go back to the question that Calvin posed in the group chat, in the chat box rather. He says, as an African society, what is the approach we need to employ to protect gender rights or transform our own religious and cultural beliefs and practices when it comes to gender equality without disregarding those beliefs? And I'm going to pose the question to Elizabeth, considering that Chinga just answered it from her perspective. But before we get to Elizabeth, I just wanted to just add that the way I see this question, I think one of the most important things that we need to do, especially as Africans, for ourselves to decolonize. I think we need to decolonize. I think we need to actually understand the reasons why everything is what it is from our own perspective. We need to understand our own history. We actually need to go back. We need to introspect as a people, because when we think about these religious and cultural beliefs, there's this perception that our cultures and our societies are rigid, they are myopic, they are not evolving, so we say we hold on to certain things because they to our benefit. But when you notice the things that a lot of people are holding on to, they're usually to the detriment of women. So people can say, well, but girls have been getting married from a young age since time immemorial. Okay, granted, but there are some cultures where girls could be walking and they could be abducted and married off without any consent whatsoever. But now there are trafficking laws against that, and they're coming from us as Africans. There are anti-trafficking laws, coming from us as Africans. So we know that we're constantly shifting and evolving. So we need to remove this perception as Africans that, our cultures and our societies are so rigid and unchanging, because that is a lie. And that is a lie that is perpetuated mostly to keep and to gatekeep things, harmful practices that mostly disproportionately affect girls and other minority genders. So for you, Erica, what do you think as an African society, what approach do you think we need to put in place to transform our own religious and cultural beliefs when it comes to gender equality without disregarding the fundamentals of whatever Africanness means to us?
You mean Elizabeth, right?
Sorry, Elizabeth.
No,
Sorry.
I think we need to have just a transparent conversation with maybe our elders and the cultural hierarchy within our societies about what it means, what gender roles and what gender stereotypes that have been perpetuated since our community's inception, and maybe dismantle them. There's a prevailing sense that culturally, girls and women are supposed to be subservient, right? And so if we live in a space where we treat a young man and a young woman no different from one another, and realizing that perhaps that there are things that a young man that a young woman could also do, and vice versa. Things that a young woman can do that a young man can also do. I think that would help change some of the narrative. And the question also talks about religion. I think religion has brought up some of these stereotypes and some of these perceptions of what gender and gender roles have to be. So I think if we take a critical look at our culture, and our religious practices, and break down some of the gender stereotypes that are in there. I privileged enough to have a son and a daughter, right? And so in practice, you'll go to church, you'll read the Bible, but you will tell them that what Adam was doing, Eve was also capable of doing. And I think if we start at the root level from the home, practicing some of these things, we could address some of the gender stereotypes that all too often have become prevalent within our societies.
Yeah. And before we conclude this panel, Elizabeth, do you have any concluding remarks that you'd like to give us before we end this conversation?
I think we've spoken a lot. I would love to see some of the policies that Chinga and I both highlighted in our responses actually be in practice more than just policies, beautiful policies that are there and we can reference. I just want to see some alignments with the policies, the talk, and like what we do on a practical level.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this statement that says change must be seen to be done. So I think that's an important thing that you've just concluded with. And Chinga, do you have any concluding remarks that you'd like to make before we close off this panel?
Just to add to what Elizabeth has said, that we need compliance. So we need a tracking mechanism. We have a robust legal framework in place, but we need a tracking mechanism, especially when it pertains to the SDGs and their realization for the African girl. Well, that girl will say, well, what's happening for me to say that I am enjoying SDG 5, I'm enjoying SDG 16. So we actually need a tracking mechanism for a girl in Africa, for a girl who is living with disability, and what this means for vulnerable communities such as girls and women in rural communities, girls and women surviving in difficult circumstances such as war, and for girls and women affected by what happens at natural level, where we've seen the devastating effects of cyclones, of droughts, and so forth. So for me, that would really mean we have done something. And I would also want to urge governments that we actually need resources. We need a government that will resource issues to do with the right to education, right to elimination of gender-based violence, including domestic violence in all its forms, so that we then have a healthy community where everyone is enjoying their rights without discrimination.
Yeah, absolutely, Chinga. Thank you so much to Elizabeth, and thank you, Chinga, for just ushering us into this conversation. I think there's so much to be said. It's difficult to even summarize because everything is very, very important. And I really, really wish you both all the best as you continue to work. And I hope you will continue with us as we get into our second panel and the rest of the speakers who are going to come forward.